This rusted hulk of metal was once Nazi Germany's most unusual fighting machine. Half motorcycle, half tank, and somehow it actually worked. I found this NSU Kettenkrad rotting in a barn, and what I'm about to do with it is going to be a nightmare. The Kettenkrad looks absolutely ridiculous. Picture this: motorcycle handlebars controlling tank tracks with a tiny wheel up front that barely does anything. German engineers created this thing in 1941, and they built 10,000 of them. That's not a prototype number. They mass-produced these bizarre hybrids because they genuinely solved a problem. They could haul equipment through mud, snow, and terrain that would swallow a regular motorcycle whole. But here's what nobody tells you about these machines. They're engineered with the kind of precision that makes restoration either extremely satisfying or completely maddening. There's no in-between. I paid way too much for this one. The seller had it buried under decades of junk, and honestly, I think he was just happy someone would haul it away. When we finally dragged it into daylight, the extent of the damage became clear. Rust had consumed the track system. The engine was seized solid. The front fork looked like it had been used as a battering ram. Most people would call this scrap metal. They'd be half right. The thing about the Kettenkrad is its Opel engine. Same basic power plant they used in cars, which means parts exist if you know where to look. The tracks, though? That's where things get complicated. Original rubber track pads are basically extinct. You're looking at fabrication custom work, or getting very creative with modern materials. I started by pressure, washing off 50 years of dirt and mouse nests. What emerged was simultaneously better and worse than I expected. The frame had structural integrity. That's the good news. The bad news is that every single mechanical component needs either complete rebuilding or replacement. Here's the real question. Do you restore it to museum-quality originality, or do you make it actually functional? Because those are two different projects with two different price tags. I'm choosing function. This thing was built to work, and I want to hear that Opel engine running again. I want to see those tracks moving. Museums have enough static displays, so the plan is simple in theory, catastrophic in execution. Strip everything down to bare metal, rebuild the engine completely, fabricate new track components, restore the steering system, make it run. But before any of that happens, I need to deal with the rust. And when I say rust, I mean rust that's structural, rust that's cosmetic, and rust that's somewhere in between, where you have to make judgment calls about what's salvageable. That's where we start. I cut away the first section of track guard, and the metal just crumbled. Not surface rust, structural compromise. Which means I'm not just cleaning and painting, I'm rebuilding sections of the frame from scratch. The front fork assembly comes off next, and immediately I find a crack running through the steering mount. That's not a cosmetic issue. That's a failure point that could collapse under load. So now I'm sourcing a welder who understands vintage metallurgy, because modern welding techniques on 70-year-old steel can create weak points that fail catastrophically. Every bolt I remove either snaps off or strips out. I'm drilling and tapping new threads into components that were never designed to be disassembled twice. The Germans built these for a war they thought they'd win quickly. Long-term maintenance wasn't the priority. When the engine finally comes out, I can see why it's seized. Water got into the cylinder head and froze. The expansion cracked the block in two places. That Opel engine I was counting on, scrap. Which means I'm now hunting for a replacement block, and those don't exactly show up on Marketplace every week. Here's what's interesting though. As I strip each layer away, I find markings, unit numbers, inspection stamps. This specific Kettenkrad served on the Eastern Front. There's Cyrillic graffiti scratched into the undercarriage. Someone captured this machine, used it, probably ran it until it died, then abandoned it. That's how it ended up in that barn. I find a bullet hole through the rear fender. Just one. Clean entry, no exit. Makes you wonder what else this thing survived. But none of that history matters if I can't get it running. I finally source an engine block from a guy in Poland who specializes in wartime vehicles. It costs more than I paid for the entire Kettenkrad. The tracks are next. I'm fabricating new pads using modern rubber compounds with period-correct dimensions. They won't be original, but they'll actually grip terrain instead of disintegrating on first use. 3 months in, I've spent double my budget, and I'm maybe 30% done. The frame is sandblasted, primed, and ready for paint. The new engine block is being machined to match the original transmission mounting points. And somewhere in my garage, under a tarp, are 400 individual parts waiting to become a motorcycle tank again. I bolt the rebuilt engine into place and torque everything to spec. The transmission mates up after some persuasion with a rubber mallet. Tracks go on last, and they actually fit. When I pour fuel into the tank for the first time, I half expect it to leak from a dozen places. It doesn't. The starter cranks. Once. Twice. On the third turn, the Opel engine coughs, sputters, then roars to life with a sound that hasn't been heard in decades. I engage the tracks. They grip. They move. This ridiculous hybrid machine that shouldn't exist, that barely makes sense even when you're looking right at it, actually works. I spent a year and a fortune bringing this thing back from the dead. Was it worth it? Ask me when I'm driving it through mud with motorcycle handlebars controlling tank tracks. Some machines deserve to run again, no matter how insane they look. This is one of them.